The credibility of a jailhouse confession is one of the most debated aspects in modern criminal investigations. When an inmate claims to have overheard or been told the truth about a crime, it immediately places law enforcement in a difficult position. On one hand, these confessions can offer leads in cases where evidence is scarce. On the other, they're often tainted by questions of motive, reliability, and accuracy. In the case of Jake, the statement allegedly made to a fellow inmate described Emmanuel's death as an accident, followed by the suggestion that the child was buried in secret. This account, if accurate, would be one of the only direct acknowledgments of what might have happened. But whether it can be trusted is far less certain. Analyzing the logic of such a confession requires breaking down the circumstances in which it was given. Jailhouse informants often gain leverage by cooperating with authorities, hoping for reduced sentences, better treatment, or other benefits. In this environment, a whispered statement could either be a moment of truth or a carefully crafted narrative designed to manipulate. The phrase "it was an accident" itself leaves much room for interpretation. An accident could imply negligence, recklessness, or a tragic event that was not premeditated. However, the lack of independent evidence supporting that claim prevents investigators from knowing whether this was a genuine admission or simply an attempt to downplay responsibility. Another factor to consider is the method of disclosure. A whispered confession to a planted inmate is not the same as a formal statement given to police under controlled conditions. Conversations in jail are vulnerable to exaggeration, mishearing, or even deliberate invention. The informant may also alter details to make the story sound more compelling or credible to investigators. This means the core question is not only whether Jake spoke the words, but also whether those words were accurately repeated and recorded without distortion. In high-stakes cases even, small changes in phrasing can alter the entire meaning of a confession. From a legal perspective, prosecutors face significant obstacles when relying on such testimony. Courts have historically been cautious about the use of jailhouse informants because of their reputation for unreliability. Without physical evidence, corroborating testimony, or direct proof of Emmanuel's whereabouts, the statement remains in a gray area. It suggests a version of events, but it does not resolve the unanswered questions. Where was the child buried? What circumstances led to the supposed accident? Why has no trace been discovered despite searches? Until those questions are addressed, the confession serves more as a possible clue than a conclusive fact. It is also important to consider the psychological state of someone in custody. Defendants may speak in ways that are inconsistent, defensive, or self-protective. Referring to the death as an accident could be an attempt to lessen moral or legal responsibility. By framing the event in softer terms, Jake might have been trying to reconcile the situation internally or portray himself in a more sympathetic light. This is not uncommon in cases where guilt and fear collide in a confined environment like a jail. At the same time, the decision to mention burial implies an awareness of concealment, which complicates the narrative. It suggests that even if there was a subsequent effort to hide what happened, the most haunting element of this alleged confession remains the absence of Emmanuel's body. Without discovery of remains, every statement, whether whispered in confidence or declared publicly, remains speculative. Investigators cannot verify location, cause of death, or circumstances with certainty. For the family and the community, this means closure is still out of reach. While the jailhouse account may provide a glimpse into what could have occurred, it cannot be accepted as definitive without supporting evidence. Instead, it remains one of the many pieces of a larger puzzle pointing toward the possibility of an accident and a hidden burial, but leaving behind a trail of doubt that cannot yet be resolved. The warning signs and systemic failures. The concerning reality in cases like Emmanuel Haro's is not only the reported events themselves, but also the many early indicators that appeared beforehand. When a child shows repeated signs of struggle, noticeable changes in appearance, or sudden shifts in behavior, those signals deserve careful attention. Emmanuel's story shows how patterns may surface through medical visits, community observations, and protective services records, yet still fail to trigger meaningful action. The central question remains, how could multiple institutions, each tasked with safeguarding children, collectively miss opportunities to step in? Doctors are often the first line of defense in recognizing risks to a child's well-being. In Emmanuel's situation, repeated visits and visible concerns suggested something was not right. At his age, it was unlikely these patterns arose naturally, which made them more concerning. Medical professionals do have mandates or reporting obligations, but the impact of those reports depends on whether child protection services respond quickly. The fact that Emmanuel remained in a challenging environment, despite concerns being raised, highlights not just one delay, but a chain of delays across several layers of the system. Community members also noticed unusual circumstances. The sounds of distress, unexplained changes, or sudden behavioral shifts are difficult to overlook. While community members may lack official authority, their observations still add to the bigger picture of a child's safety. In Emmanuel's case, those around him spoke up, but were left feeling powerless when their concerns did not bring visible change. That sense of frustration underscores a recurring flaw. Communities can raise alarms, but without swift and decisive follow-up by agencies, those concerns may go unanswered. Protective services serve as the bridge between community concerns and formal intervention. Records pointing to possible instability in Emmanuel's home suggested that professional attention had already been directed his way. The critical issue is not whether agencies recognize warning signs. They did, but why their actions? In true crime investigations, perception matters just as much as facts, and the absence of a mother's voice changes how the public engages with the case. For families, the active presence of a parent often keeps pressure on investigators and ensures that a case does not fade into obscurity. In Emmanuel's situation, the missing presence of his mother in media, discussions, or emotional appeals weakens that ongoing pressure, which in turn creates a void that others attempt to fill with speculation. Investigators are aware of this psychological and social dimension. When key family members do not actively cooperate or step into a public role, it changes the structure of the investigation. Detectives are then left to weigh whether silence is protective, for example, intended to shield another family member, or obstructive, aimed at avoiding exposure of inconvenient truths. Forensic psychologists often argue that patterns of communication, or the lack thereof, can be as telling as physical evidence. In Emmanuel's case, the lack of consistency in his mother's reported statements has been noted, and this inconsistency adds to the impression that crucial details remain unspoken. The broader community response reflects this. Neighbors and observers frequently measure their trust in a case by the transparency and openness of those closest to the victim. When they see gaps or contradictions, they begin to doubt whether all possible truths are being pursued. The emotional vacuum created by a silent parent leaves space for rumors, online theories, and even hostility toward the family. In some respects, this outcome harms the case itself because public distrust can shift focus away from facts and towards speculation, further complicating the path to justice. There is also the personal dimension to consider. A mother in such circumstances may feel trapped between grief, fear, and self-preservation. Trauma has a way of shutting people down, and in some cases, silence is not evidence of complicity, but a coping mechanism against unbearable pain. Still, law enforcement professionals often stress that grief does not prevent genuine appeals for truth. Rather, silence that stretches on without explanation tends to erode sympathy. The perception of avoidance becomes as damaging as the absence of cooperation itself. Ultimately, Emmanuel Haro's case demonstrates how silence, particularly from a mother, transforms into a central issue. It influences the pace of investigation, alters public perception, and leaves lingering doubts about what is being withheld. This silence from the one person who might have been expected to demand them has become its own kind of evidence, not physical or legal, but social and psychological. It is this silence, more than anything else, that continues to shadow Emmanuel's story and prevents clarity in a case already defined by uncertainty. The absence of Emmanuel Haro's body is, the mother's silence, Not only a devastating reality for his family, but also a defining obstacle in the pursuit of justice. In cases of suspected homicide, physical remains often provide the evidence needed to establish cause of death, confirm foul play, and connect the suspect to a crime. Without them, prosecutors are left building a case largely from circumstantial accounts, confessions, or behavioral patterns. This absence turns the focus not only to people, but also to the land itself. Since geography often dictates what can be hidden, what can be preserved, and what can be lost forever, the terrain surrounding Cabazon, California presents investigators with a unique and unforgiving challenge. Situated at the meeting point of desert flats and mountainous slopes, the area offers an environment where concealment can occur in many ways. The arid desert stretches for miles, providing remote locations where evidence can be obscured by time and nature. Rocky canyons and dry washes carve into the land, each acting as a potential place where remains could be hidden yet nearly impossible to find. When combined with the vastness of the San Bernardino mountain foothills, the area's sheer size creates endless possibilities for investigators to consider. Complicating matters further is the fact that Cabazon is not an isolated community. The Morango Reservation borders the area and major access routes, such as Interstate 10, pass directly through it. These geographic details introduce another layer of complexity. The presence of major roads means that movement is easy and quick. Remains could have been transported beyond the immediate community in a short time. At the same time, the proximity of reservation land creates jurisdictional challenges where investigative authority may overlap or require careful cooperation between multiple agencies. The combination of wide-open desert, rugged mountain corridors, and accessible highways makes it possible for someone to conceal evidence in ways that resist discovery. The desert environment itself works against investigators. Unlike wooded or wet climates that may preserve remains for longer periods, the desert is both destructive and concealing. Extreme temperatures decompose biological material rapidly, while scavenging animals scatter what might otherwise remain intact. Winds capable of shifting large amounts of sand can cover and uncover areas unpredictably, erasing traces of disturbance that might otherwise signal where to search. Even advanced technology such as aerial drones, heat detection equipment, and ground-penetrating radar struggles against the natural camouflage of such terrain. A shallow burial in rocky soil can look identical to the untouched desert, surface within days. This combination of geography and environment explains why, despite confessions and allegations, Emmanuel's remains have never been recovered. Even if search teams knew a general area to target, the margin of error in such a landscape is enormous. Every canyon, every dried riverbed, every hidden depression in the land could conceal what they are looking for. The result is not merely an investigative difficulty, but an ongoing emotional burden for the family who must contend with the fact that the land itself may be keeping its own secrets. The implications extend beyond closure. In legal proceedings, the absence of a body often restricts what can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. While circumstantial evidence may strongly happened, a physical body provides a definitive narrative, where death occurred, how it occurred, and who may be responsible. Without that, defense strategies can cast doubt, arguing that confessions are unreliable or that allegations remain uncorroborated. In this sense, the desert silence becomes not only a natural barrier, but also a legal one. In Cabazon, the land has become more than just a backdrop to the story. It is an active factor shaping the course of the case. The mixture of desert harshness, mountain corridors, reservation boundaries, and highway access has created a landscape where answers remain elusive. For investigators, it represents a vast and shifting puzzle. For the family, it represents the heartbreaking reality, hidden beneath an environment designed to erase evidence